friends. Welcome to the podcast Inclusive Art, Arte Inclusivo, a bilingual podcast about women artists. Today, I am very, very happy and excited to have here with me the great artist, Jessica Elena Aquino.
Hi.
Welcome, mi Jess. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's 10 o'clock, which is great. Oh, 11 in the morning.
Yes, we're recording fresh in the morning.
Yeah, a little cup of coffee.
Jessica Elena Aquino. She was born in 1991. She, they are her pronouns, and she is a fiber interdisciplinary artist and poet from Santa Ana, California, currently based in Brooklyn. Through the use of objects and iconography she grew up with and her relationship to nature, Aquino uses alternative techniques of weaving and sculpture to fabricate her own imaginative narratives that give meaning and form to her inherited ancestral knowledge and the poetry in the in-betweenness. The in-betweenness in navigating her pastoral longing to restore a lost communion to her Mexican-American and indigenous identity, integrational trauma, and relationship to the earth itself. Right?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the introduction.
Thank you for being here, mi Jess. I really appreciate it. And we're going to start with some questions.
Mm-hmm.
So we would like to hear a little about you. Can you please tell us
who I am?
Yes.
Let's see. It's so hard to answer that question, like how much do I tell people? But just the rundown, as you mentioned, I was born and raised in Santa Ana, California. Mis padres, my parents, immigrated here in the late 1970s from Mexico. They're both from Puebla. And so all of my brothers and sisters and we were born here. And yeah, we are that immigrant, working class family. I am the youngest in my family, so there's quite a gap. I have 3 other siblings. The oldest is 12 years older. My sister is 9 years older, and my other brother we were like a year and a couple of months apart.
Mm-hmm.
So there's already that sort of somewhat generational gap between my other siblings and myself. And yeah, like I left home when I was 18 when I graduated from high school. I went to Colgate University. I got a scholarship to go to upstate New York at that school, and I majored in painting and minored in psychology.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
that's great.
Yeah, I left home at that age, and after graduating from college, I took a break. I took a 3-year break to work in AmeriCorps. I was working for AmeriCorps at a farm for 3 years, and that sort of paid off the little bit of debt. I only had a little bit of debt after undergrad.
Yes.
And then I went to pursue my master's in fine art at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in Philly. And I just graduated in 2019, so...
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's already been 2 years. Isn't that crazy?
So, yes, when did you know you wanted to be an artist?
Thinking about when I started to have an interest in art was definitely at a young age. I have to give props to my family. They were a big influence. And the reason why I say that is because they kind of introduced me what art can look like. My brothers were into drawing. They my oldest brother drew cars, like realistic cars. He taught himself. Junior, my other brother, he did graffiti. He had this notebook, and he used colors and Prismacolor markers, around that time. And my parents too, I have to give credit because they are artists, and I didn't. And not in the sense that what people think painting and drawing.
Yes.
My dad, he worked himself up at this hotel he worked at for a long time, he started as a dishwasher, and he started to be taught how to cook by the chefs. So he growing up, I just remember he would experiment at home with his cooking and, the colors he was using, the herbs. And so that's art, that was definitely a big influence in how he was working with food. And my mom in California, we had our house, we had a little front yard, and they grew their own flowers. They love, my dad loves growing flowers, and my mom loves growing fruit, and has a talent for it. It's amazing how much fruit we have in California. And the oranges that I gifted you are from our backyard. So
you brought very nice big oranges.
And so she always made little bouquets for La Virgen de Guadalupe. We have an altar back at the house, and that was art. So I was interested in it since I was
that expression.
Yeah, the expression of art, and I was already interested in it as a child. I picked up drawing, and it wasn't until high school where I realized maybe I want to do something more with this. Maybe something in a career wise, which I didn't know. I didn't go to art school until college basically, and I only took classes here and there. But yeah, no, I was interested in art since I was a child and didn't even notice until all these little situations clicked. Yeah.
Yes. So what are your favorite materials to work with?
Right now, I work in weavings. I do a lot of textile fiber weavings using a frame loom. And the materials that I enjoy so far working with is yarn, and I've been working with corn husks since graduate school, since the end of my graduate school.
My house makes noises.
I like it. It makes you feel like you're not alone, there's always sound.
Yeah,
I feel like it's creepier if it's silent. But sorry
about my house interrupting you.
It's okay. What was the question?
The spirits are here.
I like it. No, don't say that. Yo, I'm legit scared. I'm a scaredy cat. Me da miedo todo.
You would like to live here. House makes noises.
It's a fun fact about Jess. She gets scared about everything. Yeah.
All right. Sorry, friends, about that. Sorry, yes.
No, it's okay.
So, yes. So you were saying about the materials you're working with, corn husks. And, but you haven't worked with just that, right? You have, as an artist, you have had a practice that has also been in painting.
Yeah, so when I went to college, I was a painter first. And yeah, I worked with, what's it called? Not oils, acrylics. Yeah, acrylics. And after graduating, I took a break from art. So I wasn't making art for 3 years because I was working at this farm. And then
nice.
Yeah, so then I developed my portfolio again to get into graduate school. And I came in as a painter as well in graduate school. But it wasn't until the end of my first year of grad school that and we'll talk about it later of when that switch happened, but I started to work with fibers and paper sculptures.
Awesome. Well, if you want, we can talk about it now, because I think it would make more sense to say this part. But why fibers? Is there a connection with nature that made you go into fibers, or do you want to, talk about why you went through this road?
So as I mentioned, I worked at a farm for 3 years right after college. It was through AmeriCorps, which was a wonderful experience, very life-changing experience. I worked in the farm and garden, so in the afternoons I would go. I would work with my hands all the time, from sowing seeds, harvesting, and milking cows. So yes. I was getting used to working with my hands so much. And another reason why I guess there's this connection to my work, my artwork, and the earth is because since I was a kid, I don't know why, but I've always felt a connection to earth, to the land. Growing up, my parents didn't want to show me that knowledge that they had when working with the land. They were farmers, they were growers in Mexico.
Yes.
But they didn't show me that knowledge. They wanted me to stick with books. They wanted me to stay in school and like, I don't know, maybe it's a form of like intergenerational trauma that they didn't want me to take part of that life that they were a part of because they know that it's hard work. But funny enough, like I ended up working in the farm and garden, which genuinely, it opened my eyes to so much, like just working with the land, using my hands. There was like this connection that I can't fully explain. So when I left the farm to pursue my grad school, I was painting, but it didn't feel the same, as it did when I was in undergrad. Like there was something missing. Using a paintbrush just didn't give me a satisfaction that I was trying to look into my art. And I mentioned this to a couple of my critics, and that like I want to use my hands more, but where do I start? And some recommended using like other materials that I could work with. Like, well, what if you give painting a break and sculpt something, make something out of paper or yarn or fiber, so that's the reason why I started to go in, or like get encouraged to do so. And it just clicked, like it was the same feeling when I was working with the land, and that's why I got like into fibers or textiles and weaving, using corn husk, using materials that have tactility, and whether that's being like things that are rough, things that are soft, things that are thick.
Jess is doing a residency at the Textile Arts Center in Brooklyn, right? Yes. So you have a studio there where you work, right?
Yes.
Do you have any rituals at your studio or in your practice?
Yeah. So I do have to give a little background. As an artist, I also have a job like aside from my art practice. So I work in horticulture.
Also connection to nature.
See how all these little connecting dots happen, and I didn't even expect it.
Yes. I love that you have that connection not only in your art practice but also in your work. I think that feeds your
it actually does. And I'll go more into it. Like so one of my rituals actually start before I even get to the studio. I work, so Monday through Friday, I work from 9 to 5, and after 5, that's when I go to the studios from 5 to like 8. So my rituals is the sort of like, because my job has me walk around Manhattan into just different sites that I go to do the horticulture services, like the ritual of observing, the ritual of looking at the city, hearing conversations in the subway, like all of this is a form of ritual of like listening, of observing, of quieting myself to hear what the outside is. That's like, I know that's like a sort of abstract ritual, but it is like, that's my everyday, like commute to Manhattan, back to Brooklyn, back home, like that's a ritual for myself. And then when I get to the studio, one of the more practical rituals is always, and now we're supposed to do it more often because of the pandemic, but washing my hands, especially now that it's cold, like when I wash my hands with warm water, it's such, like, I always feel like this weight is off my back after a full day of work. It's like, it's cleansing. Like, I cleanse all that bad juju, all that bad juice from, not bad juice, but just like, all from that energy. Yes. And it's just like a restart. It feels like a restart to, just engage in my art practice with a clean slate, with no like stress or, whatever moods I was before coming to the studio, kind of like leaving work life separate.
Yes.
Or like, yeah, starting fresh. And then one more ritual that I try to do, and it's been going well, is writing. Right when I wash my hands, I go straight to my studio and sit at my table for 3 to 5 minutes. It's that short, and I think it's like a good habit to keep going with. And I just write. I write whether that's a thought that I've been having all day, or like thinking about my work. Like, okay, I'm about to weave. Where do I start? What am I thinking about? What inspired me today? And just kind of free write, or like not really thinking, like a stream of consciousness kind of deal. And that's been very helpful. It's been very meditative. And then reading back, it's like, okay, now I can develop the language, whether that be describing my work, or just learning about myself and how I describe things, and how, like, from all those observations that I've had from that day, how I translate it into words. And I think that's powerful and kind of needed, to sit with your work, sit with yourself for a minute or two. Yeah,
there's power in our words.
Yeah, it's just a nice ritual for myself to keep going.
Yes. And by the way, while we're recording, she has her journal next to her over here, which I think is great. Yeah. It's part of your practice.
Yeah,
and it goes with you wherever you go.
Exactly.
Right?
Like this notebook, I carry it with myself. That is another object of this ritual. When I say I make observations or hear what I'm around, like, I write things down so I don't forget, or like, there was an older person who, like, was standing but someone gave up their seat, like that's a moment I want to capture. And so I try to carry this notebook everywhere I go.
Beautiful. Yes. What or who are you inspired by?
I guess right now, if we're going to talk about, like, contemporary artists and writers, I am very influenced at the moment with Diedrick Brackens. Shout out to Diedrick. He is an artist a weaver as well, from Texas. And he does these amazing, beautiful tapestries, that are about, his Black queer identity. And but it's like the way that he weaves these, they're large pieces, but it's a mode of storytelling, and I'm very fascinated by that right now. Like, how do you use weaving as a mode to tell stories, as a vehicle to engage audiences in that way, that it's not just about, storytelling. If we're to define storytelling, it's very vocal, very using words, using expression, but also how can we do that visually? I think it's very inspiring. And then another writer that I genuinely love and feel such a I resonate with her work a lot, is Gloria Anzaldúa, who's a queer Chicanx writer. And how she's an academic as well, and in her writing she writes a lot about, like, her identity. The sort of she is also Mexican American, and like how that cultural and yet, like, personal identities are always clashing and performing, but brings it in a way that's also academic and critiquing the status quo, or critiquing gender norms, or machismo. So it's like it resonates because these are also the lived experience of many of us who are either come from first generation immigrant families, Latino, first generation immigrant families.
Yes.
So yeah, and that's been inspirational to think about when I say about that. My work is talking about intergenerational trauma, or like even bringing that in the open, my relation to the earth.
Yes. So speaking about this, I would like to ask you if identity is part of your artwork, and if you want to talk a little about it.
Yeah, so where do I start? I guess I'll just start by saying again that I identify as Mexican American. I also acknowledge that I have indigenous roots. It's funny because a lot of wherever I go, especially now here in the East Coast compared to West Coast, especially if I'm around other Latinos, especially like Mexican and Poblanos more specifically, which is interesting too.
Yes.
They can call out like you're Mexican, or especially now that I'm wearing these masks. It's like it was so interesting. Like yesterday, I know we're going a little off topic, but yesterday we went to the art show. There was a Latino who offered me a beer, and it was Victoria. It was a Victoria beer, and he was like, oh no, quieres una cerveza, un beer, and I'm like, oh sí, oh it's Victoria, and he's like, yes, like, oh you're gonna like the Victoria, right? And like you're Mexican, and I'm like, yeah, I am, but it's like I had the mask on, so I was like, oh how do you? I mean, I don't know, I'm brown, I don't know, but it's like it was an interesting experience. Anyways.
Yes. Identity.
Yeah, but so identity is part of my work. I think for me, long time ago when I was in college, I took a gendered women's studies course, and it was about the personal being political. And in my artwork, I feel like my personal is political. It's art. It can be art as well, and it has something to say. So what do I know best? Myself, and art has been a vehicle for me to understand these tough questions, being Mexican American, being from here nor there, this middle ground that identity is always being put in. And so, yeah, it's about questioning all these sort of like identity questions of like, well, performance as well, like, code switching when you're in different audiences or different groups of people or different communities. And that's how I use my art. Like my art is that reflection. It's my art is learning about other writers who have experienced this, like Gloria, Anzaldúa, and it's also my connection to my family and my ancestors.
Absolutely.
I really have yearned a lot. Like the people who have grandparents, I've always been jealous of like people who have grandparents, and because I always wanted to get to know mine. The only way that I was able to know who they are and who they were was through my parents' storytelling. Like I grew up with their stories. I grew up with my parents' stories of when they were children in Puebla and working in El Monte, and when they came here, their immigration story, and how my grandparents were, their personalities, and I just like always felt like I know these people, but I never fully got to meet them because they died when I was young. And that's always been such a loss for me. Like I still it's funny because I feel like I'm always mourning, or feel like I just want to access it, even though I know that I will never get to talk to them or hear their stories or hear about my great-grandparents. And so for me, weaving has been a moment for me to tie in all these little puzzle pieces that I have, like from my parents' stories, from what I grew up with, these memories that I'm trying to fabricate and put together, while still considering like my relationship to the earth, because my connection to the earth, to land, is also a tying moment that I feel like it ties my connection as well to my grandparents, because we are people of the land,
Absolutely.
They were farmers, and so it's just like this ancestral knowledge that I yearn for, and that's what I work with in my art. If that makes sense.
It makes sense. Once you finish listening to the interview, in the notes I'm gonna leave the link to Jess's website so you can see all these great artworks, because I think they're very interesting to see. And speaking of that, what's your favorite artwork, the one that you have created, and do you want to talk a little about it?
Yeah. Okay, so my favorite piece, my most proudest piece that I've created was a sculpture, a mixed media sculpture that I did in my graduate school. It's called Nepatla. Nepatla actually is a Nahuatl. A Nahuatl word meaning in between or like crossroads. It's a term also that Gloria Anzaldúa talks about. Again, this being at the crossroads of different identities. Like the clashing and performing and of the pulling and pushing of all these identities that you have in yourself, and how do you how do you maneuver that? Like, you're always in this middle ground. So Nepatla, that's the reason why I named her that, but the story behind that actually goes back to Thanksgiving 2018. And at that time I was dating a white cisgendered person, and he had invited me to have Thanksgiving dinner with his family in upstate PA, and this was the first time I was going to meet sort of like the extended family. So I didn't know what to expect, but I was grateful, just to like be a part of this. I guess not grateful. I don't know. I also don't celebrate Thanksgiving, as for specific reasons that we all know. The violence and all that from like the indigenous communities that happened in that time. Sorry, little insert there. But but I was just like, to have a dinner with a group of people is just yeah. So I went, and I was the last person who entered the house, and I got a little excited because there was this beautiful room when I entered. It was my left side. There was this beautiful sunroom, and I kind of stepped in, like, not to, because I was a guest, and like my mom taught me this, like, you don't just wander into people's homes, But I got so invested in this room. But when I entered, I saw so many like frames like of Trump posters and Mike Pence and Rebecca. I was scared. I didn't know how to react. I was like, what am I doing here? I was also the only brown person in that space, which I kind of already assumed. But yeah, so it was a little uncomfortable from the beginning. And just to cut this story short, I met one of the family members. He wasn't related to my partner. He was related to someone else.
Yes.
And he was from Texas, and as you can imagine, he was a racist person. He said some very uncomfortable and unnecessary comments and jokes around the dinner table, like homophobic as well, and I just wanted to leave. And I even told my partner at the time, like, we're not staying over, right? And it was just a lot to process. Anyways, so we ended up staying over because it was a very cold winter. The trains were not really running, and yeah, either way, the next morning, this person is in the kitchen making coffee, and we wake up early, at 6 o'clock. We were already awake, and he saw us as we were waking up, and we were sleeping in the living room, and he started to talk to us. Well, he was starting to talk to me. So there's only 3 people in this conversation. It's him, my partner, and myself.
Yes.
And off the bat, he comes off with like, well, why are you here? Don't Mexicans like love the warm weather? Like, it's cold here. And I don't know, I kind of got offended by that comment, but also it went deeper. It went more, like, he started blaming me and blaming like what I represent, which is the Latino community. Like, it's because of you all, like the opioid epidemic that's happening, the violence, the narcotraficantes, the cartels, like every stereotype like you can imagine. And it was insane because it was happening so fast, but it was also so long. Like it was 2 hours conversation.
God, yes.
And it ended up being between him and I and my partner, stay silent. And I felt like I had to defend myself and stand my ground. It's still a memory that affects me because I wasn't looking for that situation. And I know that in the news, I always hear like the violence against our communities, communities that are minorities. And it was scary because it was happening in a place that I wasn't felt safe.
Yes.
And also, it was an interesting moment because even though this person was like saying a lot of things that were, hurtful and hateful and blaming and all this sort of like Trump support and ideals that this person perpetuates. It didn't click until later in that conversation. Like the turning point of that conversation was when he was denying my truth, when he was denying my family's truth of like where I come from. And at that moment, I realized like there is nothing I can say to this person that will change his viewpoints, that will, I wasn't looking for any sympathy or empathy or like, validation from this person. It's like, how can you say these things in front of me, in front of like in this house that it's not ours, and this sort of power dynamic that was happening. But I stood my ground, and I was so proud because there was something that came over me. Like I just felt the power of my ancestors, my family, and there was the way that I was talking to this person. It wasn't yelling, it wasn't anger, it was pure confidence and not hesitation. When I talk, I get caught in my own words, but at that moment, I was vicious in the best way possible. And that's where Nepatla comes from, because Nepatla is a sculpture that's made out of so many materials that I feel symbolizes all different parts of my identity. Yes. There's jeans, there's Mexican souvenirs, there's keyboard buttons, there's combs, there's paper combs, there's yarn. There's so much complexity and different layers that is like a metaphor for who I am and what we are, complex people. And that's where Nepatla comes from. That's where, that experience influenced that piece. And why I say it's my favorite, because that was the turning point. There was something that came over me at that moment in my own self that I think affects how I saw my art, that it is about identity and it is about all those complex layers and nuances and confusion, but also standing your ground and being proud and not ashamed.
Absolutely.
And it's como diciendo el dicho, like, ese nopal en la frente. Like, this man was, like, pointed me out, was able to grab me from the crowd and say, like, you are the person that I'm going to pinpoint and blame all these, quote-unquote, like, issues to you. But you know what? On the other hand, like, I'm going to make a piece that's going to take up space, that's going to, exist, because that in itself is a political act. Yes. So Nepatla is my political act. It's my political response. It's just my response in general to people like that, to people who think like that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing this story with us.
It was a little long.
You can
edit it.
No. This is what this microphone is yours right now. So, and we stand for our minorities, not only the Latin community, but there's so many, and it's ignorance in many cases of the people who believe these things. So thank you for sharing this with us. I think this is great, and this is what we're talking about when we talk about identity. So what are you working on right now?
Right now, so as I mentioned, I am currently at a residency at the Textile Arts Center for 9 months, and it ends in June. So right now, I'm preparing a proposal slash like a lot of frame loom weavings. So that's currently I'm trying to think about my proposal, and I think what I'm gonna say is talk about like the Three Sisters, which is agricultural concept, or not concept, but it actually is a practice. For those who are into like agriculture or know about the Three Sisters, it's companion planting, and the Three Sisters are corn, bean, and squash, which is a practice that came centuries ago in Latin America, well, in Mexico, but also here in the United States with the Native American communities. So I'm currently researching about that, and hoping to do different iterations of this concept. I think it's a very important one because the whole Three Sisters companion planting is very beautiful. It's about how these three crops help each other and bring back nutrients to the soil. So again, talking about the earth, talking about our relationship to it, and so right now that's my future. That's like a current work that I'm trying to like polish through the research, what the weavings will look like.
Oh, great. Yes. Can you tell us a little bit about the spaces you've exhibited in? Any future exhibitions coming, and what you've been doing in the past?
So in the past I've exhibited in many different kind of spaces, from DIY. I've been fortunate that my schools, undergrad and graduate school, I've been able to exhibit in their spaces as well, but also outside. So when I was in grad school, I was taking the class, I think it was, if I don't mistaken it or butcher it, it's Artist as Curator. And it was an amazing class. We were able to just from the ground up learn how to curate a show. And throughout that semester, we were also responsible to find spaces in Philadelphia.
Oh, wow.
So it was local, it was like cool. Local spaces, or, talk to gallery people. So it was like a DIY process, but I've been able to exhibit in more well-known spaces around Philadelphia, like Vox Populi, and outside. I also try to apply for open calls outside of like wherever I'm living. So there was a show in upstate New York. I'll be actually in 2022, hopefully in January 22. I got accepted to this group exhibition called Manufactured Narratives, Chronicle of Textile Artists, at the Urban Contemporary Institute of Art in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And that show was supposed to happen last year, in the spring 2020, but because of the pandemic. Because of the pandemic, it got postponed. So honestly, I've been lucky to like exhibit in different spaces, whether that's locally in my city or just outside of the state. I haven't exhibited in like big museums yet, but
exactly.
That's in the future.
Okay, great. And now speaking about the pandemic, as an artist, how are you handling it?
Wow. As many of us, we've been struggling, right? When it began here in the U.S., when it came, it was March 2020. We both lost our jobs.
Yes.
How we met, Rebecca and I, and many of our other people we worked with.
Yes.
We met at the Museum of Modern Art. We were working there. And we lost our jobs. At that moment, I was just like I was a little stressed. A little stress is not the word I want to. I was stressed, as many of us were. where financially I was not stable. The IRS came, like around that time, it was also like tax season, so I was like had to do my taxes, but at the same time I had been audited by the IRS, which was very stressful as well. So there's a lot that was happening financially. I was trying to find a job just to maintain myself, and again, I was with a partner at that moment, and we were living together with our roommate in Philadelphia, which it wasn't bad. It wasn't. Luckily, I had that. I had a community there to talk to, people that I can be with in quarantine. But it was also tough. Like, I kind of had a pause. I wasn't making as much work during that time, like artwork. I was lucky enough to have my apartment. Our apartment was a 3-bedroom. My partner and I at the time had 1 bedroom, and my roommate had another, and then the smallest one was my studio. We all, paid equal rent, etc. So I had a studio in my apartment. So it wasn't like I didn't have space or time to make art. I had plenty of time. We were unemployed at that moment. But it was so hard to motivate myself. It was just so stressful, and I knew that I needed to keep myself busy. I needed routine in some way. Also, it was just a moment. It was the whole pandemic has been a time to really reflect. Like, I know a lot of people are like, oh yeah, no, stay at home and like, get to watch shows or take your time to do things. But honestly though, like sitting on like in your house all day every day, there is a moment where you gotta reflect, and that was that time. Like, what do I really want to do? Like, this is a moment where like, holy shit, like things are shutting down. I'm not able to be around my friends or people or communities. So it was a thinking moment. Like, okay, well, the whole museum situation just went down. Yes. Do I even want a career in museum studies? Because, how it was handled wasn't the greatest. They let us all go like that. Yes. And it was heartbreaking.
It was heartbreaking.
And,
absolutely.
Especially like an institution that does have money, and, and we were so close and felt like, really, I don't know. It's
we were enjoying that job a lot.
Like, and with the people too.
The people was amazing.
And so it was very difficult, but I did keep myself busy. I wasn't making, like I said, I wasn't making artwork, but I was making things. Like, I'm a very DIY person. Like, do it yourself, learn how to do it. I don't want to buy things. So I started to pick up macrame. Like I said, I work in horticulture, but before I was in this field, I had plants. I was a helicopter mom with my plants. Like, okay, well, what can I do more? Okay, macrame. Let me learn how to do macrame. So I was doing macrame at home. I started to make masks. I started to make these roll pouches that I have. So they're like tool pouches made out of fabric that I had accumulated from grad school. So I was definitely teaching myself these things. Or like, again, I wasn't doing artwork, but I was doing something, and I was being artistically involved, whether or not I saw how it fit into my practice. Learning more sewing skills. YouTubing a lot. YouTube came very in handy. Yes. So like in that sense, I started to make these things, and then during like that time too, like the beginning of the pandemic, it's like, well, I don't have a job. Like, what can I do to at least get some funds for myself? So I started selling my macrame. It was also spring summer season, so I started to grow my own herbs. And I would give these out to people, as like just a gift of hopefully bringing relief to someone, using herbs, using, again, land, like the products of growing your own things. I built my own garden in Philadelphia, like my backyard in Philadelphia. So I was involved in some way that kept me sane.
Yes.
And at that time too, I was also trying to apply for, there was a lot of COVID relief grants that were happening for artists. So I started to apply to those, and I was very blessed that I did get a couple that could sustain this, like practice what I was doing during the pandemic and sustaining myself in that way. But also, I was applying to residency. Like, a lot of people were telling me about the Textile Arts Center before the whole pandemic had happened, and the application was due like around this time last year, and I almost didn't apply, Rebecca.
Oh, wow.
Because I was so scared of, like, I don't have money. I owe the IRS. It's a 9-month residency, which means I have to move to New York. I don't have that money. Unemployment hasn't gotten back to me. I haven't even got any checks. I didn't get any checks till maybe May? So I had no funds for 2-3 months. So it was a very stressful moment, but my partner at the time was very encouraging. Was like, just submit the damn application. And I did it. And I heard back was it April or May? And I was slightly mortified of the idea that I might get accepted, because that means I have to move. Yes. And it's like, how do you maneuver that when you don't know the unknown? It was a pandemic, things were closed, quarantine, the possibility of getting it.
Yes.
But when I got the acceptance letter, my partner at the time was like, it is funny because it was dinner time, and I got the email, and I was reading it out loud, and it said, "Congratulations, you've been accepted to residency at the Textile Arts Center." And when I read it, I was happy inside, but my face was mortified of oh no. But yeah, that was something to look forward to, even though it was a scary, uncertain situation, because that meant okay, well, then we need to find a new place to live.
Yes.
Moving
to New York.
Yeah. So I moved to Brooklyn in August 2020 to begin the residency in October. So it was a lot of things happening this past year.
Yes.
Getting a new job, finding a job to sustain the cost of living in New York City, which is insane. Compared to Philadelphia. It's insane. It kills me a little bit how much I have to pay for rent, but yes. It was an opportunity, and I needed to take it.
Yes.
And I was scared, but I was reminded that I've been in situations like this where it's uncertain, even if it's a pandemic, that you have to take it. Sometimes you just gotta do it.
Yes. You should be proud of yourself. Yes. Doing in the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah, I know.
And, when you are creating, how do you keep your art practice going, especially when you get stuck or unmotivated?
Yeah. That was again the pandemic. So sometimes when I do get stuck in my art practice specifically, I have to walk. I take walks to clear my head. And also, again, I mentioned before, writing has been very reflective, and kind of, even just writing why are you stuck, why are you having quote unquote artist block, what's happening that you can't move forward. Reading has helped too, just reading things that I'm interested in, whether that be for fun or for leisure, or when I get unstuck, I have this book I've been reading for the past couple of months that I haven't finished. It's by Rodolfo Anaya, who's also one of my favorite authors. He's the one who wrote Bless Me Ultima. But I'm reading one of his other books called Heart of Aztlan. And it's very inspiring. It's the way that he describes the lands of New Mexico. Nuevo Mexico. And it's just, that's encouraging. It's inspiring to read other artists, other poets, I've been reading Jessica Salgado, who's a poet from Los Angeles. People check her out. Shout out. So those are the people that help me to get unstuck, because they are also people who talk about identity, talk about the land. I try to read scholars or academics, poets who also are questioning these things that I sometimes don't even know how to bring the language or like mold the language of like asking myself these questions. And that's been very helpful to get unstuck, to find inspiration, read mythologies from our culture. Yeah.
Right. Good. And I know there's a very interesting story about your thesis and your voice as an artist. Would you like to share that with us?
Yes. So the thesis that you're talking about, I'm assuming it's the one in undergrad.
Yes.
Yeah. So my senior year of undergrad at Colgate, I was making these 3 large paintings, like the size of doors. They're pretty big, and that whole year, how do I say this? Okay, a little bit of context. Sorry, I have to go a little bit behind. I have to describe who Jessica was at that moment in her life.
Yes.
I was a 20-year-old. Again, I'm the first in my family to leave home, to leave California and go to a 4-year university that I got a partial scholarship for at, this college is in upstate New York. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's elite. It's very elite. The majority, you can already tell like what the demographic is going to be. It's like white, elitist, and I'm from Santa Ana, California. I'm the first person to leave home. Yes. And I know there's a lot of context behind that, and leaving familia behind and to pursue something else. And I was very insecure when I was in college. I reflect back, and it was a lot to process, because being first generation, battling again these sort of I was comfortable at home. I was around my community, like people who look like me, who speak like me.
Yes.
And then to uproot myself and go to the middle of nowhere with the majority being a white elite institution, and how people saw me and perceived me, that was so new and so like I know about racism. I know about internalized oppression now because of those experiences that I had there, now with a different community. I knew about that in my own community, machismo y todo lo que, everything that's experienced there, but to be outside. Yes. So I was very insecure because I come from a working class family. I was always in bridging programs in school. Yes. Bridging programs to always help me, or I didn't go to the best performing schools. My high school was the second worst performing high school. So I always felt like I was never good enough in school. I was always behind, and I always had to play catch up. So going to this institution at 17, I didn't have a lot of self-worth. I felt like I don't deserve to be here. I don't know the language people are using. They're using so many big words and jargon that I don't understand in the classroom. So I became very insecure, and at the same time, stuck out, that I questioned myself a lot. And that's when this whole identity crisis also happened. Which I feel like usually happens, in these moments when you go to a different place that you don't feel connected to. So I was always paying attention to other people. I always felt myself yearning, what if I was rich, and what if I had this whole accessible like resources for me. Like what kind of person would I have been? And I know that's awful to say, but I was thinking about those things. Like so much insecurity. So I was always listening to other people, people who were white, and I didn't know how to maneuver that. So, I knew how to stood my ground, but I just didn't feel like I belonged. So that also took an effect in my art practice. Like I was paying attention to a lot of my critics, like my classmates who were also majority white. And so senior year, going back to senior year, I was making these paintings, and I was trying to talk about la mirada, which is another concept Gloria talks about, like la mirada being a political act, a statement. And I was paying attention to a lot with like my audience, and my audience again being white. Like, oh, how are they interpreting this? But a lot of people didn't get it because it's like, it's la mirada, and we know what that means. We know what la mirada looks like and what that insinuates with just a look that says so much. With just a gesture, it says so much. And so I my senior year, I was making these paintings that I wasn't happy with. And I knew for that long that I wasn't happy with. Because I was paying attention to the people who were telling me, like, no, you should do more of this in your artwork, or talk about this in your statement. And so it was like being molded by many different voices.
Yes.
And 3 days before I was supposed to turn in my thesis, I had this moment of like, no, like a moment that I was saying to myself, like, I don't want to graduate with this feeling that these paintings aren't mine. I wanted to restart. I wanted to restart all over again, the whole thesis and complete it in 3 days. I talked to my mentor, and she was, who already passed away, unfortunately. Oh, no. Professor Underhill, she was a badass. She was an intimidating person who I feel like a lot of our classmates didn't like to interact with her, but I loved interacting with her. She was that one that like always pushed me to question things. So she told me, I told her about all these feelings that we're having, and this sort of like, I didn't want to graduate feeling like I was listening to all these people, but I wasn't listening to myself as a person and as an artist. And she told me, like, off the bat, Jess, you're going to graduate in 3 days. Like, you have a decision to make. This moment will define who you are. You can either restart and, do it all over again, or you can continue and try to finish whatever you have left. But this will define who you are in some way that you're going to interpret eventually in the future, maybe. But if those paintings aren't ready, aren't in the gallery on Saturday at 12 p.m., you're not graduating. And it was a hard conversation to swallow, because it's like, holy shit, I may not graduate if I don't finish these paintings, these massive 3 paintings. I'm risking letting my family down, letting their sacrifices down. Like, it was so much weight that I didn't know if I wanted to do this, but I did it. I said, fuck it. And that's like my logo. Like, that's my like little slogan now. Sorry. That's like my little slogan. I was like, fuck it, Sorry, I didn't mean to cuss. But I did it, Rebecca. And it was 3 days and nights that I spent in my studio working my ass off. Like, it was a cathartic experience. Like you mentioned, when we had discussed this before, that it was like I was letting go or peeling away these sort of like voices that I had always carried with me in these past 4 years of like telling me who I am and finally standing for myself. I know it sounds ridiculous, or like, Jess, you could have gotten yourself together before. But no, it was like this happened at a moment. It needed to happen at that moment. Yes. And I'm so glad that I made that choice, because it made me feel proud of those paintings. You know, when I graduated, those paintings were like just summarized my whole experience. That I grew out of this college a much more stronger, you know, resilient person. And like, but I also, like I said, it was like 3 days of blood, sweat, and tears, because I was also still lost and like trying to figure out like, holy shit, well, I need to finish these paintings. But I did it, and I turned them in on Saturday. My parents don't know any of this. Like, I try to hide some of these experiences that I had during college, and I'm not gonna go into detail, but they don't know how hard it actually was. And I can only relate to them in that way because I'm not comparing and contrasting our experiences. Like, my parents immigrated to this country, and I know that was hard for them. I can only imagine the discrimination, how much work they had to do, how many sacrifices they had to do. And I felt like I could relate to their story in some way, because it felt like that, you know, when you don't have family around, when you only have yourself and your working hands. And yeah.
Well, I think you're very brave. And thank you for sharing this story also with us.
Thank you. I mean,
I think that was, you know, not everybody can do that. So I'm pretty sure you're proud of yourself.
Oh, of course.
You should be. And
yeah. Yeah, no, it was a hard choice to make as an artist at that moment in my life. But it was a choice that I wanted and needed to make for myself. And also, like, just to finish it off, like, what solidified that choice and my intuition, because intuition and my voice is important to me.
Yes.
And following that gut is when I turned in those paintings. Everyone was surprised. Everyone was like, wow, Jess, blah, 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 you know. But I sold out before the exhibition opened, which was amazing. And I didn't need that validation, but it was also really good to feel and that. But also, because of that choice, I risked honors. I didn't get honors, and I really wanted honors, but at that moment it didn't matter, because I graduated with something more and so much self-worth.
Yes, absolutely. This will be remembered,
and
it's a big impact in your career,
for sure.
I would say. So speaking of these, I feel like there's many artists probably, or like people who want to become artists that are listening. What would you recommend to these people?
Yeah. I mean, I can only speak from my experiences, right? So for me, I guess an advice would just be, you're going to be in situations where you'll have to be vulnerable. Doing art is a vulnerable thing. You know, sometimes it can be about your own personal life. It can be about your memories. It can not be about that, and it could be abstract or conceptual or performative, but it's still your creations. Like, it is an amount of vulnerability. So it's being ready for that. It's being ready for those critiques. It's being ready for that commentary from an audience that you're not going to be able to control what they say or what they think about your work. And so in some ways, it's like building this armor or like this backbone to take that and not separating that personal, like not letting it affect you. You know, I know some of us can be very, very vulnerable and sensitive towards criticism, which I understand. But that to be able to separate that it doesn't define you, like what other people think of you or think about your work doesn't define you.
Yes.
And being able to realize the difference, you know, I guess another thing would just be, I guess from that story that I just said, like following your intuition, following your own voice. Sometimes you're going to be in situations where people may try to mold you or pull you apart or tell you what to do. But at the end of the day, you also have power in your choices, and what advice you're going to take. But always try to listen to that voice and listen to that intuition. Because at the end of the day, it's your life. It's your artistic creations. Yeah.
Yes. And I feel like this goes also for people who don't necessarily want to be artists.
Mm-hmm.
So this is good advice.
Thank you.
What's the biggest lie in the art world?
Okay. I'm not up there in the art world, I'm just emerging, but I'm still an artist, and being around people who are around the art world. And I guess the biggest lie that I've also come to acknowledge over time since I was young, because when I was young, I had this whole, and I'm guilty of it, romanticization of a romance perspective of what an artist is. I was a part of that. Oh, artists are just so easily inspired. They can create beautiful things and they're going to get rich and famous. No. Okay. So the rundown. Not every artist wants that.
Mm-hmm.
Not every artist is aiming to be famous or to get money or to be a commercial artist. That's the biggest lie that I think, or there's so many stereotypes about artists that, the starving artist is definitely a big one. Being an artist also depends on your privileges. There are artists who come from a very supportive family financially as well, who are want to support their art practice, and that's great. And then there are artists who struggle, who have to constantly apply to grants and scholarships and residencies and things to help them in their practice. And I think the biggest lie is that it's so easy to be an artist. It can be a luxury for many people to be an artist.
Oh yeah.
But for others, it's hard. It can be difficult. It's a struggle to maintain your own practice financially, but then also going back that not everyone wants fame.
Mm-hmm.
There are artists who want to genuinely be involved with the community, that want to help them. There are artists who, want that fame and glory. That's great. Yeah. But so I guess that's where I come from with the biggest lie that I've also learned to appreciate. Myself, I'm not terribly invested in becoming famous, or, I don't want to be famous when I die. I want to be known now, but while I'm still alive. But I also want my work to be involved in the community. I don't want to be exhibited all the time in white elitist institutions. That's not my end goal.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make art because I enjoy making it, and also it allows me to speak about myself in a different way that is vulnerable and hopefully connects with other people.
Absolutely, yes. And what is the truth about art? Is there a truth about art?
Well, for me personally, it's that art doesn't die. Art will never die. I think as long as there is injustice, there is violence, there is discrimination, art is here to stay. There will always be a way that us as people can create. I think we're all artists. Some people, it's funny when I hear people say, or when they know that I'm an artist, they're like, oh, I'm not very good at drawing. I'm not very good at painting. I suck at it. And I'm like, no, you have an artistic way of creating. You are human. People can create art at even ancestors before learned how to fucking build what's it called, fences out of sticks. We are creators. Mm-hmm. That's art. Art is a form of creating, of expressing, etc. Us as people, we are artists. All of us. It's just tuning into those intuitions and ways of creating.
So what would be an ideal world, in the art world, of course, from your perspective?
An ideal art world from the perspective of Jess Aquino.
Of Jessica Elena Aquino.
Oh, sorry. Yes, my artistic name is Jessica Elena Aquino. Only the close friends call me Jess and Jessie. So if you don't know me, don't call me that. Yeah. What was the question again? I blanked out.
What's the ideal art world,
yeah,
from your perspective?
The ideal art world, I would have to say that the government can pay artists that, being an artist, studying to be an artist, like, it's a lot of energy and a lot of commitment. And I would love to see an ideal world where the government can support artists, that pay artists the compensation that they deserve. Like, right now as a working artist, like, I've been hustling to work multiple jobs just to keep my practice going. And that also, in an ideal world, is that society can take us seriously. Like,
yes,
we are contributors to communities. We are, we do different things in our practice, not just making art. Like, we do research, we write, we constantly write for grants and applications, and that's labor. All of this is labor that is never accounted for or like recognized. Like, it's the same amount of labor that you need to in order to like work in another field, like technology. People go to school to learn about these things. Like, well, we also go to school to learn these things. Where we express, we do more. We do a lot more that it isn't recognized as like quote unquote work. And so in that way, like, my ideal is that, yeah, the government like can provide financial like modes for us to survive and to live off our practice, and encourage that more. Like, imagine if there was just a world where us as artists are getting paid to be artists, and how much artwork would be in this world.
Yes.
And that I wouldn't have to feel like I need to compete, or that this like that I'm like searching for breadcrumbs here, like, to just get financial stability or like grants to support my practice, and then for society too, to just acknowledge who we are and what we have to offer. Like, we have so much to offer. Imagine if artists just didn't exist.
No.
Like, what does that world look like? Where does that commentary, there are many different kinds of artists in the world, but we're also people who have perspective in issues and in our everyday.
Yes. You make the world a better place.
Do we? I don't know, but we contribute to it. We contribute
absolutely.
to something in this world.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
Where do you see yourself in 5 and 10 years? 5 years and 10 years.
Oh my, that's like a big jump. 5 years. I don't know. With like the whole pandemic, everything's been a little like, again, uncertain, which is fine. It's just like,
hard to think about that.
Yeah, because I always have like, I try to keep myself organized and like have a set plan, but
you're very young, so I'm just curious
you're young, but I guess in 5 years, honestly, I would like to be a professor. I would like to teach. I have my MFA, which I could potentially start now, but right now I'm just excited to get my work going. Like, figure out my own forms of technique and develop my style, so then I can be prepared to teach, or
Yes.
But in 10 years, I don't even want to say 10 years, but in the near future, I would like to build my own residency. Again, I talk a lot about like my connection to the land and all that experience that I had with it. And so I would like to build a residency that has these two pillars that I enjoy so much: art and like working with the land, agriculture, horticulture, where in this residency, artists, dancers, poets, writers, and any person who is interested to come and be in community with the land and with each other. Community is so important.
Yes.
That's all something I didn't talk about, but like I've been really blessed to be in this residency during the pandemic with 7 other amazing artists and thinkers. And we've been building community together, and that's so important. As an artist and for myself as a person, like it's to be in community with other people, to have dialogue, to have in-depth conversations. This podcast, like it's needed and it's important, and it's like a form of fulfillment.
Yes.
And maybe some people resonate with that. So if you do, let's talk about this residency. That's like why I want to build the residency.
Yes. And you were speaking about poets.
Mm-hmm.
You are a poet.
Yeah.
You were talking about your writing practices. So, do you write poems very often?
They all deal a lot with like my own artwork. So I try to write a poem at least for every piece that I make. At least, or like jot down. Again, I carry my notebook with me, so I jot down like potential titles for future poems. It's like that's how sometimes my process works for creating a poem. But yes, I enjoy writing poetry. I fell off the wagon these past couple of years, but I felt with so much that has happened this year, personal and outside forces, it's been a mode of healing and processing. So
yes,
yeah,
I see. I'm gonna leave, of course. I think we can access your art and your poems and the things you create through your website, right? So I'm just gonna leave the website in the notes of this podcast, so you can go and see her work. Follow her on Instagram. I'm gonna leave also her Instagram, right? Is Aquino.je. Is there anything else you would like to share with us today?
No, well, just thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for just sitting with me and having this conversation, both English and Spanish. It's been so much fun. And thank you for just creating this. I know you were like also struggling to like wanting to do this, but I'm really glad that you did. And having this platform, talking about women artists specifically, I think it's important to talk about people who have been ostracized or oppressed and not in the spotlight, whether that's being a woman artist or, any other minority box that people can check. And I think that's important. It's important, especially in the art world.
Thank you. Yes, we're just getting started, hopefully. And it's really good to have you here speaking about, all these different things that you're opening about with me today. And I'm happy to have you here. As you can hear, Jess is a great artist, and it's combining the power of words with nature and working with your hands and creating artworks that are going to be and are relevant to our times. Like, thank you so much for that. Thank you for sharing the mic with me today and being my first person to interview in my podcast.
I hope it was okay. I hope it was good. I'm very insecure about these things, but
no, I think this was great. Thank you so much, Jess. And thank you if you have been listening. Thank you if you're staying until now with us. Let's support Jess and her art, and that way we can make exclusive art inclusive.
Yeah.
This bilingual podcast is produced by me, Rebecca Navarro. If you like it, please subscribe on your platform of preference. You can comment, rate it, and share it. You can also follow Arte Inclusivo, Inclusive Art, on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or email me at arteinclusivopodcast@gmail.com. I am leaving all the links below for reference. Thanks again for listening, and let's make exclusive art inclusive.